head of operations, still keeps a hand in on actually doing the work, does all the meshing as well, and the LiDAR technician, and all the cyber scanning, and she's sometimes the tea lady, but don't tell them I said that. The other member of the team is an old colleague of ours. We've been working together for a long time, John Mark. He's predominantly more on the arm scanning data and the photogrammetry side of it. Doesn't like getting wet, so tends not to like the LiDAR side. And does a lot of our modeling. One thing that you'll see from what we're talking about is we're saying that we're more coming from the mathematician end of the market. We're not artists, but we're working in the film industry, which is effectively art. So where do we sit in for trying to create digitally accurate models, but for someone to do an artistic thing? So you won't see us talking about ZBrush and modeling and tweaking. We give them the raw data and they do something with it. So I'm going to tell you the story of how we do that. But since I'm being given the after the lunch bit, so hands up, everyone. Cool. Okay, so put your hand down if you've seen that. Okay. That one. That one. That one. Okay, there's a few up. That one. Oh, any of those? So that's a selection of the work on the films that we've been working on. That doesn't include TV and adverts and all the other bits and pieces. But if I ask you, have you actually seen any of our work? The answer is no. We sit in the middle. So there's the guys that do the filming, the guys that do the visual effects, and sitting in the middle is us, recreating this real world to give to them digitally for them to tweak it. You can't, as we've seen in earlier discussions, you can't start throwing around billion polygon meshes in real time and renders and all this stuff. They want it nice and simple. So it's how we take that data for them to do some work with. So the inevitable, what kit are we using? So again, now remember there's only 3 of us. So been a mainstay for a number of years, P40, sitting there, as I said, taking the money shot. I have a load of photos, and we keep having to sign NDAs, so I keep having to not show you things that I'm allowed to. Anyway, there's something quite important behind me. It's the sort of kit that we need to do to get the scanners into exactly where we want. So nice tall tripods, you can see the blue screens in the distance. And that will become quite crucial later when we start seeing what they're doing with the meshes of the bit you can see. So what we did for Leica, we actually created some stuff for them. There is a scanner on the top of that, you can see one at the back. So before I was working Max, I actually worked for Leica Geosystems, and this was my baby. I spent 3.5 years designing it, and we're working with the designers, and this is when we were actually beta testing it. So being in the film industry actually allowed us to be in environments that no one could see it. So we could go off and put it through its paces. So you can start seeing the sort of size of the tripods we were using that will quite happily go up 15 meters. No, it's not a real boat. These guys will build anything. Unfortunately on this one it was a little bit more of a case of, they say, yes, of course it's stable, it's not a boat, it's not floating. Yeah, of course it's moving. So we're getting very good at scanning moving objects nowadays. So here's my daughter, took her over to do some testing with RTC, and we had 2 days to scan the entire boat. Obviously we can't get to the hull, so the second day they drove it out into water, turned it around, came back, parked it so we could do both sides, and the deck, and 35 metres tall to the top of that one. And here's some examples of the sorts of deliverables that we're making from this data. This would be probably classed as a medium resolution, so again we'll talk about how some of this data is classed as tracking data. Relatively low resolution meshes allowing the artists to match where the cameras are to where reality is, so they can line things up. But recent years, obviously the predominance of photogrammetry, we're now merging external imagery with terrestrial LiDAR. So this is from a film called I Kill Giants, came out a couple of weeks ago. Very good. They 3D printed half of that because they filmed it in Ireland, needed it fully textured, 3D printed half the stuff, took it to Belgium, stuck it on a green screen so they could do the two things simultaneously. You cannot tell where reality and the fake one goes. And that's the sort of level of detail that we're trying to get to. Just an example of sort of the literally a snapshot. So every time we deliver, they get an example of that. It's actually very old. We were doing that back in 9 years old for Dark Shadows. So I saw a few people say that they've seen it. So again, it doesn't matter what these things are. It can be a building, a structure. This is the bus from Valerian, so some big market scenes. And the sort of level we'll get to detail with a LiDAR scanner. So the way that we do a lot of scanning is getting huge quantities of data and working backwards. So that's predominantly from the LiDAR side, but for the film industry they also need to do moving objects. So far we haven't seen any presentations where people have been talking about how to capture something that's going to move while scanning. It's been a vase and a statue and a spaceship. The spaceship doesn't move. But how do I scan you? Even just breathing is enough to move you. So we have a integrated head and body photogrammetry rig. We actually named that stuff. So this is Bubble, named after the first character that was ever scanned in it. So it's Rhiannon, which was in Valerian, and her character's name is Bubble. She went through about 50 costume changes in one of the scenes, and transitions from one scene to the next. You can see Joel sitting in the middle, he was one of our assistants at the time. He is jumping. So we're not only talking about a moving object or a shirt or something, he was literally jumping up. In its current configuration, there's 187 digital SLRs in there. We like cables, apparently. All firing simultaneously. So currently, due to the way that cameras work, they don't all quite go at the same time. So in essence, we're firing this at the speed of the flashlights. So at 2.5 thousandth of a second, we can capture something in space. And the colour chart. So that's the big rig. This is the small rig. This is what we still think is the only fully mobile head and body rig in Europe. So we bought ourselves a monster truck, bought ourselves an American RV. This is one that's got an expanding size. So you do need a fair amount of space. So in the bubble rig you can see we've probably got a volume, that sort of size, maybe 7 foot tall, because, costumes have big hats. But inside that one, we've only got 160 odd cameras, but we literally drive, slides come out, plug it in. Much smaller volume, 6 foot, very configured. The cameras are so close that we have a real depth of field problem. So we've got to make sure that the heads are in the same places all the time. I'll talk about this a little bit later. So this is multi-pass. This is our we do use for our heads as well. But more importantly, and I'll talk about it in a minute, is the lighting that's inside it. A very specialist way of doing the lighting. And there's another 60 odd cameras in there. And some video cameras that we'll talk about in a minute. So the crucial thing with the lighting is in this particular one, is to get as even as light as possible. So sometimes flashlights can be a bit harsh, so having a complete full dome and get no shadows. As we say, it was a family business. This is Louise's daughter. Myself and Jennifer flew out to, I think that was Romania. Can you come and do one head for one person? So we quickly built a portable version. It comes in about 5 petty cases. And they went, yeah, no, you will be in a tent next to the lake on grass. As long as it's black, we'll go and scan the thing. So this is for William Tonga, the French tennis player. and they were just doing a face replacement on a simple advert, but they just didn't want it out on the water, so they used the stuff. So it's the sort of results. Apologies for the resolution. Alan's getting his ultra-high screens causing you problems. But just to give you some clue as to the sorts of process we're doing, we're taking the photogrammetry, creating 3D models, texturing it how the vendor or client wants. So this is a fully cross-polarized rig, as in not only the cameras but also the lights are polarized, so we're removing virtually all of the speckle and the highlights of people's skin. That's why sometimes they look a little bit dark. Very old one, and actually was used using a structured light scanner. So we still dig them out, and we have particularly someone asked black, and structured light's actually pretty good on black compared to photogrammetry. And again, it's the sort of level of detail that we've been able to get in the last 10 years or so. We've been working quite closely with a VR company. And they do their own stuff, you know, they do their own photogrammetry, but what they can't do is things like people. So we've been putting dead bodies, firemen into their VR spaces, and they're slowly moving to try and make their VR spaces not only as realistic as possible, but also as interactive as possible. The last job we did with them, where we had a controlled burn inside a container, we literally took every item out of it one at a time, scanned it, took it one side. So in their VR, they can literally reconstruct the entire room. He was about 7 foot tall. And a head doesn't actually need to be a head of somebody. This is actually a prosthetic. Again, just let's sit around. So, because we can put it inside the rig, and I think sorry, I forgot your name, was talking about the occlusions on the automated system. So we put it in the middle of the rig, fired it once, had a quick look at the model, went, okay, here's the occlusions, went in with a single camera, but because it hadn't moved and the flashes were working, again, adding an extra 50, 100 photos. And so it probably takes about 300 odd photos to take one of those. One of our favourites. One of our favourites for a couple of reasons. One, they look very cool. And these they were models, and the model of them about this size. And they were used on sets to give the actors something to talk to. So rather than having the 3 guys that literally ran around on their knees for 4 months, with mocap suits on, they would come and wheel these in. But Weta, the visual effects house that was using this, it takes quite a lot of time to convert this model into a retopologized version. He said, actually, this is so good. As long as on screen it's no bigger than this, we're just going to use your model. It saves me render time, blah, blah, blah. They're very cool. Okay, so multi-parts it's effectively a lighting rig. They're LEDs, and they are perfectly synced to the cameras. So as we move from just using standard photogrammetry with standard cameras, all the way through to the videogrammetry that we're also doing, we can maintain an incredibly high level of accuracy on the lighting conditions. And these are the sorts of results. So that's actually a 3D model, not a photograph. So this one has been fully retopologized and put back through. And what the artists are looking for is all the real subtle details, which is why they're reconstructing all the normals, literally to the pore level detail, using this lighting rig coming in directions. So it's the sort of level of detail and the sort of accuracy that we're being able to pass over to the vendors nowadays. Again, that's a 3D model. I was told I had to show this. So inside that rig as well, so we were talking about this standard head rig, 50 odd cameras, single flash. The multi-pass type application where we're actually running 15 steps and the cameras take 15 shots in 1.2 seconds, which allows every single photograph to be perfectly aligned. But we've also got 16 video cameras running at 30 frames a second. So unfortunately I haven't got the version where it moves around, but this is 30 meshes a second running in Unity, which I can show you. And this is pretty new. Really not many people are doing it. And even the VFX houses are, I wouldn't say unsure of what to do with it yet, but are pushing their own boundaries. So they're looking for tracking information. We're looking at putting our, so that was quite an old one. This is the sort of level of detail we've got after a bit of R&D. This is our R&D partner, Lee. So he actually built most of the stuff that you see. And you can start seeing the sort of level of detail that these artists are allowed to get. Again, with that very flat lit application. On that one, you've got the tracking markers, so they'll take their base meshes, align the base mesh to reality, and then warp that base mesh from frame to frame to frame, and then it allows the render engines to go very quickly. I put in a camera for close range. You like cameras? But for close range work, predominantly we're using Ramsey, but also photogrammetry. So it doesn't really matter if it's a coin or I've just been asked to do 6 kilometres of downtown America somewhere. We tend to have the kit that goes with it. So that's actually a cast of Lonesome George, the last of his species from China. And this is the sort of level of detail you can get out of a metrology scanner. So we don't use that kit for metrology, but to be able to pick up the wires, that's a model only about this size. Guns, boxes, you name it. And on occasion, this doesn't happen very often, but we were actually asked to merge, so all of a pair of boots, a jacket, a bit of thing, so we arm scanned it, but also LiDAR scanned the entire set and put the two together so that the ultra high resolution was sitting in the same spot. And I think, there you go, this is sort of the detail we're getting. Not my work, but those digital amps are crawling down the mesh that we delivered from the LiDAR. And we also scanned him, and also photographed her. Okay, so we've got about 10 minutes left, which will give us just enough time to tell the whole story. So, as you saw at the beginning, we were talking about Lucy. Lucy was a Luc Besson film, actually one of his most successful. Made a huge amount of money that's allowed him to go off and make Valerian. But the reason I'm talking about this is how not only we are doing the LiDAR side of it, but also how the vendors are increasing their ability to deliver more on the product. So this is Paris, so they have a very interesting way of working in Paris. There's big posters on the wall saying, Luc Besson will be filming here is who is in it, and here's a phone number. Do it in the UK, he goes, here's your NDA, you just tell anybody and we'll never work again. So effectively, if you come behind you, there's a Concord at the bottom, turn left, you're going down Rivoli with the museum on your right, and you'll see it moving in a second. And that's what was filmed, and what we were asked to do was rodeo the VFX guy, and you can see how much motion blur is in here. And as a director, he likes to have everything moving very quickly, and he cuts it very quickly, and they couldn't track the photograph, the video to the reality. So they asked us to measure it. So when we delivered it, the nice thing about Paris is it's mostly still concrete streets. And what they realised was, even though they were just using it for tracking purposes, that the data was so good that they could actually start putting it inside their render engines and actually run the cars on top of the mesh to get the next level of accuracy. Not accuracy, but realism. So that's the shot, but that's actually how many cars you see in the film. So if we flip between it, That's what they filmed, and that's what they added. And if you can watch it and you can tell that they're fake, someone's done their job wrong. It's effectively what the VFX industry is talking about. So no example, that's exactly what they filmed, but that's actually what you see in the film. Again, so there's a set in a hospital, and you can see there's literally holes in the walls, holes in the ceilings, actors hanging from it. But what you actually see in the film is no holes, knives, guns, and this is where the scene where all the stuff raises up to the ceiling. So every single gun was scanned, the room was scanned, they remodeled it to allow them to fill it in and put the things in the right place. So I'll just talk over the top of it, and I've done this a couple of times. So you'll see things picking up. So actually everything you can see was scanned and is sitting in the background for them to place their objects in the right place, have them drive up and down all the bumps in the right place. Bit of green screen, and mesh it in the background. So as you can see, even though I can't show you much of the data itself, where it is sitting in, particularly on the large stuff, so buildings, streets, objects, and on the people side, we're looking much more on the recreating what they look like or what they're wearing, and I've just got enough time. This one's very quick, but what you'll see is a bit of a breakdown from Iron Man. And what it shows quite nicely, and it's one of the few examples I could find where it actually shows the meshes of which bits are real and which bits are not. So, you know, nothing he's holding is real. None of his suit is real. So we scanned all of the suits, all 45 of the Iron Man suits, so they could fly around. And what you'll see as it goes through. See there. So this scene that's just coming up, we'll start seeing him flying around, and it will jump from one set to another set without really being able to tell the difference. And a lot of that is, this is a set, and the ceiling is fake. And it's trying to get that joint between the two as accurate as possible. So there's a term set extensions. Most film sets don't have ceilings because otherwise they can't get the lights and the cameras in. And half the time there's no point building, you know, a 40-story tower block. They'll just build one line and digitally put in the rest. But to digitally put in the rest, you need to know its geometry. So weirdly, actually, even though it's very artistic, it's incredibly accurate. So there's the green screen that he was actually flying around in. So again, we saw before he was flying around inside the set, but they couldn't quite do it on this one. So halfway through, he come back. Oh, he's actually in a green screen with a completely fake arm and a fake leg. So again, it's very quick, so if you watch it carefully, this is in essence the process. So they have a film set. That's actually the 3D model, which has been derived from the polygonal mesh that we deliver. Highly edited. You know, we haven't quite found the automation that everyone's looking at, because doing a vase is one thing, but doing an object like that. And in essence, this is just a BIM process. Deliver them high quality edited meshes. They'll convert it to something that they know will be able to be rendered very quickly. So rendering a one single square with a good texture, because they will add things like the bump and the reflections and the mist and all the other stuff. But they still need to know the geometry very carefully. Taking a set of HDR spheres, which we're starting to do now, or a change has also now been doing fully photogrammetry on the walls and floors. So actually, as you saw from that beach, not necessarily just taking these sphericals for reprojections, but also texturing it and creating a full-blown texture map for it. The artist will then literally paint where they want, light it how they want, and put him in the middle of it. Thank you.